Hi, I'm Michellene Davis. The North Ward Center is committed to educating the public about the importance of community programs that give all New Jersey residents a chance for a better life. That's why we're proud to support the important educational programming produced by the Caucus Educational Corporation.
Funding for this edition of New Jersey Capital Report has been provided by the North Ward Center, PSE&G, committed to improving New Jersey's economy and strengthening its communities. NJIT, New Jersey Institute of Technology. Horizon Blue Cross Blue Shield of New Jersey. The law firm of Gibbons PC. Johnson & Johnson. And by the Healthcare Foundation of New Jersey, founded by the Jewish community. Promotional support provided by NJ Advance Media and by Observer New Jersey Politics.
Hi, Steve Adubato. We are here at the North Ward Center in Newark, New Jersey. We're here for a conversation, an important conversation. It is called Building Trust, Race, Police, and the Community. And our colleague and partner and good friend, Ryan Haygood, President and Chief Executive Officer of the New Jersey Institute for Social Justice, joins us. How you doing, partner?
Look, thanks for having me here, Steve. It's great to be here, and particularly to participate in such a timely conversation as this one.
Yeah, well, we were with you and your leadership over at the New Jersey Performing Arts Center. You and your colleagues and some others brought some folks together to have a similar conversation. We were trying to continue that dialogue. Talk to folks who are picking this up now for the first time. Explain why it's so important that we have a meaningful, sober, candid, and constructive dialogue about police and the minority community.
Yeah, I think, today's conversation that you've taken the lead in organizing is, I think, the next most practical step from what we did at NJPAC. That was a public forum where we brought to a local level a national conversation that's happening around race and policing and about the need to build trust in communities and the way that we need to really think about how to reimagine the relationship between law enforcement and the communities that they serve. And this conversation today is really about bringing key stakeholders and policymakers and law enforcement officials and groups like mine to think about how do we advance an agenda, a policy-driven agenda that really builds the trust that we so desperately need in our communities, particularly of color, here in New Jersey. And I think, look, people are mindful of what happened last week in the election and how this really is a moment for us to think about the opportunity here in New Jersey for the state to lead in terms of advancing meaningful police reform. So what does it mean, Steve, to have an agenda where law enforcement and community leaders and people who live in the community really think about how to reimagine a relationship between the law enforcement community and the community broadly that both builds public safety and trust together? And so I think as we're thinking about the national conversation that's taking place around race and policing, the national conversation about what the election means, here locally I think we have a chance to be a shining light for an example of what other cities across the country can look to.
What do you think it potentially means for this conversation and for the reality of the interaction between police and the minority community that we have? We will have a new president who has said some things in public about this very important and often contentious topic.
I mean, I think for us, the opportunity we have here in New Jersey is to create the kind of relationship that you and I have been discussing for the better part of the last year, both in our private conversations and our public conversation at NJPAC and at this one today. This is really a chance for us here in New Jersey. I think nationally, President Trump and members of Congress, members of state legislatures across the country will be thinking about, so what's a good model for how to reimagine policing, how to transform the relationship between law enforcement and communities? Where does that exist in this country? And I think here in New Jersey, we have a chance to say, look to us. Here are things we're doing here. One, as you know, in the last year, the former Attorney General, John Hoffman, issued a body camera directive. At that time, he was one of the first attorney generals to do that, requiring all state troopers in New Jersey to wear body cameras this year.
Why does that matter so much?
Well, that matters because that's part of a broader conversation about what it means for police officers to be accountable to communities they serve, to be transparent, to have their actions recorded, for better or for worse, to record the instances in which police officers engage meaningfully and safely, and when they have challenges. I think what the community wants to know, absolutely, if you're a police officer, you want this transparency, you want this accountability, you want it to go on record as showing how you're doing your job. And at the same time, if you're in the community and you're worried about police officers' behavior, you want to be able to see what it looked like in real time. So part of it is the body camera directive that the former Attorney General authorized, but that's trickling down to the cities now. Here in Newark, Director Ambrose explained that the city of Newark will have body cameras for all officers in the next year or year and a half. That's meaningful reform that the state of New Jersey is taking the lead on.
And by the way, that's reference to Public Safety Director of Newark, Anthony Ambrose, part of our conversation with 12 leaders dealing with these issues. He will be part of that. By the way, the Essex County Sheriff, Romano Fontoro, is with us as well. Many of his men and women are wearing body cameras.
That's right. And part of this conversation is you're finding law enforcement leadership embracing these police reforms, embracing opportunities for greater transparency and accountability.
Is New Jersey the exception?
New Jersey is one of the rare states that has taken the lead on requiring state troopers to have body cameras, and then moving to the cities to require the same. Other states and cities can look to New Jersey as a model for how to do this, but there are other pieces of it, which you and I have discussed before, around the recent consent decree that the city of Newark entered into with the Department of Justice.
Yeah, explain to folks real quick the consent decree with the Federal Department of Justice. What does that mean to have the federal government monitoring the Newark Police Department?
Sure. So, I think what we're anticipating with the consent decree, and Peter Harvey is the federal monitor overseeing
the former Attorney General in the state of New Jersey.
That's right. Overseeing the implementation of the consent decree. We're anticipating widespread police reforms in each aspect of the way that the police department does its work, from recruiting and hiring police officers, to training, to the use of force policies, to body camera directives, to the way that they maintain evidence, the way that they investigate police misconduct. This is interesting because the consent decree really grew out of about 49 years of, fierce and consistent activism on the part of a number of Newark residents and Newark leaders. The ACLU was really instrumental over time in encouraging the Department of Justice to investigate the Newark Police Department. And what they found, the Department of Justice found, was widespread police misconduct. So, as you know well and your viewers know well, 75% of all police stops in Newark were found to be unconstitutional. And better than 20% of police stops were found to have an excessive use of force. So the Department of Justice brought this to the city of Newark's attention, and the city of Newark entered into a consent decree with the Department of Justice to remedy the violations that the Department of Justice found. Peter Harvey is the federal monitor who will oversee the implementation of the consent decree over the next 5 years, and this can't happen without the community. So what I love about your leadership, Steve, in this conversation today is part of it is bringing high-level law enforcement, community leaders, law enforcement officials, nonprofit leaders like myself from the Institute for Social Justice and others to talk about the way forward. But this can't happen without the community's involvement. So we want the community as part of the consent decree team. We're part of that federal monitoring team at the Institute. We want for the community to be a part of each step we take toward this transformation.
Last question before I let you go.
Sure.
How candid and honest can we really be with different folks, with different points of view, different experiences, putting it all out there without being very defensive and argumentative?
Well, I think, Steve, real reform, real progress requires total honesty and total transparency. So we don't have to agree on each aspect of the way forward, but we do know that we have a goal in mind. And the goal in mind is a community in which there is trust that's built and maintained and that flourishes between law enforcement and the communities that they serve. And you can't get there without an understanding of where we are today and an aspiration where we have to be tomorrow.
Ryan Haygood is the President and Chief Executive Officer of a great organization called the New Jersey Institute for Social Justice, and we would not be here in Newark at the North Ward Center having this conversation if you had not, with your colleagues, started that conversation and continued that dialogue. It's important work to be done, partner. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your leadership, Steve.
Thank you. We'll be right back.
To see more New Jersey Capitol Report programs, visit us online at njcapitalreport.org. If you would like to express an opinion, email us at info@njcapitalreport.org. Find us on Facebook at facebook.com/Steve Adubato, PhD, and follow us on Twitter at Steve Adubato and at Raf P. Rahman.
We're now joined by Professor Todd Clear of the School of Criminal Justice at Rutgers University-Newark. Good to see you, Doctor.
be here. Thank you.
You are one of the top experts in this country when it comes to the issue of criminal justice and the question of the challenge of police-minority relations. You're joining us for this conversation here in Newark, New Jersey, on this question. Why is it so difficult for so many to have an honest dialogue about police-minority relations?
I think it's because there's a lot of mythology about the problems of crime in places like Newark. There's a lot of belief that the solutions should be simple. People should be able to get this stuff worked out very quickly. And I think we have such a long history of exclusion and lack of investment in cities, disinvestment in cities, that it makes it very hard for a place like Newark to achieve the destiny that it could. And then it creates strains between the law enforcement authorities and the people in the community. Those strains then get played out as political ideas, as people want to use them for benefit, running for office or trying to make a point or trying to get some funding for this, that, or the other thing. And for the people who live in the middle of that, the police officers and the residents of Newark, all of those things going on outside are not solutions to make it so that Newark is a safer place where people can live and raise their kids.
You did some work in the South Ward of Newark, which is a big piece of the city, one of the largest wards. Tell folks what you found and why is it relevant to the folks in the tri-state area watching us?
So crime in Newark, violent crime in Newark concentrates in a very small number of locations. It concentrates among a small number of people. What that means is that this idea that Newark is people say war zone, is just simply not true. We learned when we looked at the data, for example, that when you look at individual street segments in the city of Newark, every year at least 80% and sometimes as many as 90% don't experience a single crime. The concentration is so much that 4% of the residents of the city of Newark are estimated to be involved in 60% of the shootings. So, and in terms of location, places like South Ward and the West Ward have much higher rates of shootings and homicides than other parts of the city. Parts of the city of Newark are as safe as anywhere else in the nation. So what that means is that if you want to do something about public safety in the city of Newark and you're focusing on guns and on homicides, the focus can be very much on a small set of people, a small set of locations, and a particular set of problems. 2/3 of the shootings in Newark are related to disputes. And if you can make it so that disputes end in another way or don't call for guns to be used, then you can really create a foundation of safety in the city of Newark that will last for a while.
Professor, let me ask you this. What is it that you see about the way the police department in Newark operates? Right now, there is a federal monitor. Peter Harvey, the former Attorney General of the state of New Jersey, is here representing the federal government, overseeing the Newark Police Department. What is it that you see that causes so many who we're talking to today? Listen, it took a long time for that to happen and the federal government to come in and, if you will, oversee the police department. But what do you think it is that causes so many who we're talking to today in this forum here in Newark to be so positive about the way the police in Newark interact with the community and why Newark has not had, I don't want to jinx anything, horrific incidents, as many as other cities involving police in the minority community?
Well, first of all, I think we're pretty lucky to have...
I'm sorry for interrupting.
Sure.
I asked some of your colleagues if we were lucky. They said it has nothing to do with luck.
Well, we're lucky to have leadership that makes this a very high priority, both in the public safety side and among the elected
You mean with Mayor
officials.
Baraka?
The mayor and the police director, Ambrose, I think recognize how important it is to bridge this gap that has existed between the community and the police. The findings that led to the consent decree are pretty disturbing about routine patterns of behavior of the police in regard to the citizens. And we have to understand that Newark is not just one group of residents. There's multiple citizens here. There are people who come here for arts and for athletic events. There are 40,000 students, many of whom come in and go home in the day. There are people who live here, and there are people who work here. And so each of those communities has a different set of experiences with the police. And again, the problematic experiences were concentrated among a very small number in particular locations. And in those places, through really strong leadership and policies that are implemented and then monitored, you can change the nature of the relationship between the citizens and the police.
Thank you so much, Professor.
You're welcome.
We'll be right back.
To see more New Jersey Capitol Report programs, visit us online at njcapitalreport.org. If you would like to express an opinion, email us at info@njcapitalreport.org. Find us on Facebook at facebook.com/Steve Adubato, PhD, and follow us on Twitter at Steve Adubato and at Raf P. Rahman.
We're now joined by Michellene Davis, Executive Vice President and Chief Corporate Affairs Officer, RWJBarnabas Health. And we're also joined by the Prosecutor of the great County of Passaic, Camelia Valdes. I want to thank both of you for joining us. We just finished a very in-depth, I'm not going to say heated, but pretty candid conversation called Building Trust, Race, Police, and the Community. Michellene, we started this conversation offline a long time ago. Prosecutor, you know this conversation. You are from this community, city of Newark. You're from Camden. You know this issue well. Describe the conversation we just had with 12 really important, significant, and caring folks about police-minority relations.
I think that the discussion that we had this afternoon is one which needs to occur in every community, in every town, in every city across the nation. Really, it was a discussion where individuals were able to put down their title, but take up the arms of being committed to creating a better society. So it was a candid, frank discussion about what tools we've utilized thus far, where we are right now, and the road that we have to travel.
What's your biggest takeaway?
I was encouraged by what I heard in there because we talked openly and honestly about the very difficult challenges when we talk about the intersection of race, police, and community. And it is a multi-layered discussion, and I think you assembled a tremendous cross-section of professionals that are really working in this field. And so we're all working towards the same goal. Our roles look different, and that's why it's important that we talk to one another. I'm encouraged by a lot of the things that I heard in there because it's the same. If you really peel back the layers, people are concerned about violence, they're concerned about communities, and they're concerned about how do we move forward from where we are.
We had folks from law enforcement, religious community, healthcare community, Ras Baraka, the mayor of the great city of Newark, part of it, but also racial and ethnic, gender diversity. That's not the norm out there, is it?
Unfortunately, it is not, Steve. You know,
so what does that produce when people just talk to folks who look like themselves? You know, I'm sorry for interrupting, but go ahead.
No, not at all. I think that, you know, what's interesting is the fact that we are all human. And so what you had in that room were individuals who are willing to push past their own humanity, right, in order to achieve that greater good. So what does that mean? What does that look like? Well, we self-segregate naturally.
Self-segregate.
We self-segregate naturally. You can go into cafeterias at colleges across this nation, and you will see individuals who are sitting with other individuals who look like themselves. You can do the same thing in grammar schools, right? So we have done this over time. We've fought about segregated housing areas. We've pushed back against redlining, and yet and still, there's a natural tendency simply to want to see someone who looks like you, to believe that they come from a background that identifies with yours in order to come together. What we heard in that room today is the fact that we've got to be bigger than that. We've got to be able to push past that and to really reduce the fear that separates us from being closer in proximity and relationship one with another.
So well said, but Camelia, let me ask you this. The risk, I don't know if that's the right word, but having folks who are so different, with different points of view, different backgrounds, ethnicities, race, et cetera, et cetera. What happens when people really put it out there? It gets uncomfortable.
It gets uncomfortable. It's hard. Policing is not for the weak-minded, the weak-spirited. It's not, because we're dealing with violence. We're dealing with social issues. We're dealing with misogyny. We're dealing with racism. We're dealing with death in many ways. And so I think everyone in that room, whether you come from a social work background, an activist background, a law enforcement background, we want the same things. I think the focus on not only individual biases, we've talked about unconscious bias, but from my perspective, talking about systems, policies, things that we can all work on together, bearing upon all of our experiences. And they're different. You know, treating violence as a public health issue, We
Which
don't
is
really.
what Michellene talked about,
Michellene
right?
talked about public health. We talked about communities. We talked about the value of, or devalue, depending on the situation, on African American lives. And so it's uncomfortable. It's hard, to be able to sit across from one another and say, look, this is what happens. This is the role of the media. This is the role of law enforcement. And to be able to take away how do we, given the enormity of the challenge, what do we do? And the answer is we keep pushing, we keep working, we keep sharing with one another. And it's not easy, but neither is the issue.
Michellene, let me ask you something. As we listen to the prosecutor, she said something. Again, people were in some ways testifying, if you will. They're putting it out there. When the prosecutor talked about the fact that she's born and raised in this community, she is a person of color. She's the first woman, first Latina, if you will, in this role as the prosecutor of Passaic County. She said in front of everyone, and again, you'll see this on PBS, FiOS, and other platforms, she said that when she's had to deal with certain cases, when in fact an African American is looking for justice at the hands of law enforcement community, and then you are looked at not as someone who is from that community, but as an outsider, one of them, someone in blue.
Correct.
I know I didn't even ask you this till now. What were you thinking? Because you've been friends for a long time.
Full disclosure. Absolutely. And we talked a little bit about her coming on the show and doing this today. And really, I know her as a person, right? But I also know her as a member of that community, right? So I know this young woman. And one of the things we talked about was that if someone attempts to come at her, I'm going to have to get myself together, because I know, Steve, that any reaction that pushes her away, cognitive dissonance is something that we all have the right to practice. We just simply should not, right? So the issue is that it all is a response of fear. It all comes from the place that, recall that even the Black Lives Matter movement, what was talked about today, it is a response to an ill upon the land right now. This is not something that was just born out of itself. It is a response to feeling disenfranchised. It is a response to being saddened, to being hurt, to being harmed, and having no one stand up to say, stop doing this to them. Right? So when she enters a room and individuals automatically step back from her, right? They want to create a divide.
Like she could never understand.
Absolutely. I wish that I could say that we chuckle about it, because we know that she's from Newark. We know that we say all the time she's blacker than most, quite frankly, because of the fact that we know her background. But we also know and understand that A, they do not, and B, that they have the right to be concerned, because they're not operating in isolation. They're operating under the historical precedent that's been laid within this country, right? And so the grand news is that she comes to that situation not looking for a fight, but with a heart of compassionate management around the situation.
It's so interesting. You said you didn't take it personally. If it hurt, you wanted to cry. Full disclosure, you'll see it on the air. That's not a secret.
Yes.
But the reality is you knew it wasn't about you personally. It was about, as Michellene described, something bigger than you. How the heck do you say to yourself, this is my job, it's something bigger?
I have to stay rooted in faith in order to do this job, because I see people at the absolute worst times of their lives, either because they're victims or they're the survivors of horrific crimes. Not only violence, but sexual assault, child abuse, domestic violence, fatalities. I see this day in and day out. And so I knew when I chose this particular service that there were going to be some hard times. And so I have to compartmentalize and understand that a lot of times when people are coming at me, as we talk about, they're coming at me because, one, they have access to me. There's a lot of displaced fear. There's anguish. There's confusion. And so I need to take a step back from how I feel personally and understand that if I'm going to be a steward for what law enforcement is trying to do, which is to keep people safe and keep them alive, then that just comes with the work that we have to do.
A couple seconds. As it relates to police-minority relations and building trust, which is what this whole initiative is about, you're usually an optimistic person. How optimistic are you about this?
Wow, Steve, I realize that many are called but few are chosen, and if we are in these roles to influence this particular issue, then we are both, right? So I have to cling to the hope, because hope is at my very core exactly who I am, right? And look to the hills for the tomorrow that I know is going to bring us to that space. I have to remain optimistic.
The alternative is not acceptable?
It is unacceptable to me.
I'm here, and I'm going to continue to stay here because the work is great, but the opportunities are greater, I think. We have a real opportunity to come together now more than ever when so many of the discussion is divisive.
That's right.
When we have to pick a side, either it's Black Lives Matter or Blue Lives Matter, or all lives matter. When it's, do people feel American or not? Do women, are they included? Do they have a role to play? It's too much for us to say we're not going to participate, because we all see what happens when you sit it out. And I don't have any intentions of doing that. I can't give up hope. One, I'm from Newark. I'm not wired that way. Two, I think, and we saw it today in that room, discussions that ordinarily wouldn't take place now have a forum and a space to take place. So I'm excited for what can be.
Thank you both, especially for not giving up. Thank you.
Thank you.
New Jersey Capitol Report is a production of the Caucus Educational Corporation, celebrating over 25 years of broadcast excellence, and 13 for WNET. Funding for this edition of New Jersey Capitol Report has been provided by the Northward Center, PSE&G, NJIT, Horizon Blue Cross Blue Shield of New Jersey, the law firm of Gibbons PC, Johnson & Johnson, and by the Healthcare Foundation of New Jersey.
How do you create change? By cultivating hope. And we see that every day. In the eyes of our preschoolers, in the souls of the seniors in our Adult Day program, in the minds of the students at Robert Treat Academy, a national Blue Ribbon School of Excellence, in the passion of children in our Youth Leadership Development Program, in our commitment to connections at the Center for Autism, and in the heart of our community, the Northward Center, creating opportunities for equity, education, and growth.